Everyone, thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Kyle Cleveland with TUJ's Institute of Contemporary Asian Studies. We're very happy to have with us this evening Megumi Sasaki, the filmmaker who's made this recent film called A Whale of a Tale. She had previously made a documentary called Urban Dorothy in 2008 that won a number of film festivals, and a subsequent, in 2013, a subsequent version of that called Urban Dorothy 50 by 50 continues with that and is in theatrical release around the United States and Japan. Before I knew Sasaki-san, I had seen that film and really enjoyed that film. I highly recommend it. And I think speaks something very promising about this documentary. Her third film, which we'll be addressing tonight, is called A Whale of a Tale, which is set in the small fishing town of Taiji in Japan, which some of you may have seen the Academy Award-winning film called The Cove. This film is kind of a response to that. This had an international premiere in the Busan International Film Festival, has been in a number of different documentary competitions, is showing, I think, now in Shibuya and also starting next week in Yokohama. And she'll tell you more about that. She's worked as an anchor, reporter, a news director for NHK Television. She lives in New York City. And this evening, the way she'll present this is to show some extended clips of the film, talk through that, and then after that, we'll have a chance for an open Q&A. So let's welcome Megumi Sasaki.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you for Temple University of Japan. I really appreciate this opportunity tonight. We've been talking about this for a few years, right? And I'm glad finally it happens tonight. So I'm sorry we can't show the whole movie, but I just want to guide you through several clips so that you get some idea. And so I want to show like 4 different parts of the film tonight and just present some points of discussions in the background why I decided to make this movie in this way. As I was introduced, I live in in New York for, this year is 30th year. So I live in New York in the States longer than Japan. But I'm from here and I was born and raised in Sapporo. And I went to university in Tokyo and had a few years of working experience in Tokyo and then went to New York. So don't do a math, okay? Anyways, so living in New York for a long time, and whenever the media talks about whale hunting or whaling in South Pacific by Japanese government, it's 100% negative. Oh, Japan is doing it again, how dare they can do this, such a great animals, and it's only one way. And I was always wondering, why is that? In the States, everything has pro and con, the very active discussion, whether it comes to like gun control or abortion issues or Trump elected president or whatever. The discussion, there's always a pro and con, and, at least two opposite sides of the argument. But when it comes to whaling or dolphin hunting, there's only one side we hear in the States. In 2009, I saw the movie The Cove in New York City, and I was totally shocked because it was such a great movie. It was so well done. But wait a minute, there's something wrong here, And I kind of knew the background. I had all this information, but something is very wrong with this film, and I could not figure out why for a long time. And then gradually, it started coming up, the thinking and feelings. First of all, documentary, as I'm a documentary filmmaker too, and a lot of my fellow filmmakers, they have a very strong sense of justice. So they don't want to see, the power, the big corporations, the government is doing something wrong. So they point the camera towards this institutions of the government or politicians. So, documentary is such a powerful tool, but this movie, The Cove, I know that this is funded by someone very wealthy, investors, multi-million-dollar project, and brought all this like experts, from Hollywood, with tons of like, amazing, like using the most recent technologies, and then point the camera to a little fishing village in Japan and towards fishermen. I knew these people are not doing anything illegal. They're all doing hunting, dolphin hunting and whaling based on Japanese law. They're not hiding anything. But they guided, sort of like misled the audience that they're doing something secretly, and with this gray, sort of like a cloudy, dark pictures. And I remember Rico Barre's comment is like, you look at this, when you see the town, there's all different kinds of like whales and dolphins everywhere. So if you don't know, you almost believe that they're protecting whales and dolphins, but this is a small town with a big secret. It's like, yeah, right. Because that comment represents that they just don't know, they don't understand anything about Japanese religion, Shintoism, and Buddhism. And yes, Japanese, it's probably something that is not really well perceived or understood by outside of Japan, the way that Japanese sort of like, always say, oh, kawaii, cute for the animals, but if it's delicious, they eat it. That kind of like food cultures, the animal relationship between the humans and animals, it's very unique. Probably that's something closer to animism, I should say. I'm not going to get into that deeply today, but it's completely different from the idea of the Western, sort of like a Christian, Judeo-Christian idea. So it's not like which is right or wrong, but it's just different. And we don't understand each other about that at all. So anyway, so there was many misleading and misinformations, misunderstood sort of like section in the film. And but the film was so well done, and I thought the impact of this film is going to be tremendous, and it sure was. It turned out to be Academy Award a winner. And then in March next year, 2010, more surprisingly, I didn't hear any response from Japan. Japanese government, Wakayama Prefecture, maybe they released some statement, just one English, short comment. But that's all. So the message from the Cove just spread out like wildfire all over Japan. And nobody hears the fisherman's side of the story. So I've been really disheartened by the darkness and the hate created by this issue of whaling. So I knew it was very political and very tricky, very sensitive, landmines everywhere. And I already stepped on a lot of them. But since this is such a issue that bothered me for such a long time, in the Japanese saying, there's a little fish bone stuck in your throat, it's something, it's not hugely problematic, but that bothers you just a tiny bit for a long, long time, and you cannot reach out to, take that out. So I felt like this issue for me has been a little fish stuck on my throat. So I really wanted to get that out. And this is the solution for me. So how many of you have seen the movie The Cove? Oh, great. So do you know anybody? So how many of you, even if you haven't seen it, what it is about? Yes? Okay, most of you. Surprisingly, this is a film about Japan, right? So when I have a talk like this, when I ask the same questions, just a handful of people have seen the movie. And then no more than half of the people have known about the movie The Cove. That's the reality, and it's quite shocking, isn't it? Even the people in Taiji, or the people at the Japanese government, that directly in charge of these issues, like a fisheries agency or foreign ministry agencies, a lot of them haven't seen the movie even. So that's quite surprising to me. And so 2010, in March, The Cove won the Academy Award. So that really sort of like inspired me. That was it. I just couldn't stand this anymore. I have to do it. And I started making the movie in fall of 2010. So it's exactly 7 years ago. I never imagined that would take this long to finish it and show it, release to the theaters. But I think the movie needed a very, this length of time organic time that the film required to make, to finish in this way. I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but first I'm going to show you the first 15 minutes of the movie, from the opening until about 15 minutes into the film. So you will see how that year of 2010, when the movie The Cove won the Academy Award, people from all over the world, the activists, traveled to this little town, Taiji. This is really, really far. Like even for Japanese, even from Tokyo, it takes about 7 hours door to door to get there. And such a remote town, but people from all over the world come there to protest. So this year, do you know the organization called Sea Shepherd? Any of you? Do you all know that? Okay. So the 2010 is the year when Sea Shepherd started sending the members to station there to watch the hunting. So that's when sort of like a conflict started, and that's when the most of the conflicts happened. And so this first 15 minutes sort of shows how it was. So I'm going to talk about that later, but first I want you to see that clip. So when I went to Taiji in 2010, first I have to negotiate to get approval to do the interview with the fisherman. And fortunately, I was introduced by someone who already has shot in Taiji, and he already gained a tremendous trust. So he put me in touch with the town's government official. So it was not that difficult for me at the beginning to get an access to Taiji whalers, but they were extremely skeptical. They're very reluctant, and they were told overall not to talk to media. And that's understandable. And because they were all, when you saw in the Cove, the fishermen were provoked by the activists, and they were screaming and yelling. They looked so barbaric and violent. So they were told not to, behave like that. They just have to sort of not to express their emotions, or not even talk to anybody, strangers, especially somebody with a camera. So it was a very slow approach to them. I had to gain a trust a little by little, but they were still very skeptical at the beginning, I would say. So what I try to do is to be open about it. They did not want me to interview the Sea Shepherd. They definitely did not want to see me talking to the foreigners. They only wanted me to talk to the whalers. But I told them very clearly at the beginning that, no, I'm going to be showing the both sides of the argument. This film is not to support whaling. This film is not to promote dolphin hunting. This is not sort of like talking back to the Cove, but I just wanted to show the both sides of the argument in a balanced way. So I talked to them, both sides, in the same way. I did not want to make anybody extremely bad. You might the Sea Shepherd guy is kind of aggressive, But I did not want to portray them as a bad people. And you see them, they're sort of like a human face later. So what I try to do is to interview the sea shepherd, foreigners, right in front of the eyes of the fishermen, right in front of the eyes of the townspeople. So there's no secret. There's no rumor. Because they were so skeptical when, after the experience of the Cove filmmaker team, because they approached to the town, approached to the people that they wanted to film and to show the beauty of the area. This is going to be just an educational film. So nothing was mentioned about dolphin hunting in the way it was going to be portrayed as it is. So it's understandable, right? They're so skeptical about that. So there is no secret. I did not. And then, of course, as you know, they use a lot of hidden cameras. So I did not want to make anything secret. They should know what I'm doing, both sides. So that's something I wanted to make it very clear. This scene in 2010, most of these pictures were shot within 24 hours. In October 10th, in 2010, there was a big festival, like fall festival in Taiji. It's called Asuka Shrine of Taiji has a big festival. So we went there to shoot the festival. We didn't really plan to do anything else at that time. But next day, whalers decided to sail out for the hunt. So we went to the port at the dawn and we filmed them, going out sailing. Hunting. And so after we shoot that, we were supposed to go back to Tokyo. But on the way, we passed by the Cove, the beach, and then we saw the Sea Shepherd people just arrived by the car. So, okay, why don't we just, try to talk to them? We never talked to them before. So, we slowly approached them and asked them if we can talk to them on camera. And they said, yeah, sure. They're very friendly and very easy to talk to. Probably easier than talking to fishermen. Friendlier than fishermen. And they're from America. So it was very easy for me to communicate with Sea Shepherd people. So we were interviewing the fishermen, and right in the middle, so the back, with the ocean in the back, and then they started driving in the school of dolphins. And then they started getting really upset, and then they started tweeting and making phone calls, and then more, activists came to the beach, and domestic and foreign media came to the Cove, and local policemen and Coast Guard came, and nationalists came, and then we didn't do anything, but everything started happening, and then all this incidents happens almost in one day. So it was a very exciting experience. We had to go to next town, Shingu, where they have a shopping mall. We had to buy more tapes because we probably shot 20 hours almost straight. And that's a major part of the this movie. It has become. So as you can see, it's not just about dolphins and whales, but there's so many different ideas you see, just little by little, in this picture. I don't know if you picked up, how Japanese see the Sea Shepherd or environmental NGOs. They believe that they're doing it to make money, and they think that donation is a dirty money, so they cannot receive such money. These little things, there's a lot of misunderstanding happening there. So I just thought it's not just about dolphin and whales. There are so many differences that we have. It's not clarified. And both sides believe that they're the only right people. The other side is wrong and we are the only right one. So that's where the conflict starts. That's where the hate starts. And that's where the clash starts. So I wanted to portray that part through this picture, through this scene. And surprisingly, we met the guy who I never thought would be playing an important role in the movie. That is going to be actually next scene. You see him, the guy who was driving the propaganda car with a loudspeaker, the nationalist. If you are working for Japanese media or foreign media, maybe major media institution, you never point the camera towards these people because they are big trouble, right? So, but I was very reluctant about that. But he turned out to be surprisingly a peacemaker between the two parties. So I like you to take a look at that scene and next scenes. Those are the one that I kind of like the most in this movie. So please take a look. I was shocked to see the policemen started talking about the manner instead of like arresting them. And it was a very serious situation actually. And then policemen were sort of like showing off handcuffs. And well, just to show, explain the background, what happens in the Cove is because at that time, when they drive in the animals like dolphins and whales, they drive into the Cove and then they close the net so the group of animals cannot escape from there. And first thing next morning, they bring all these animals to the next sort of like a hidden area where the Cove was shot, and then they slaughtered the animals there. But overnight, they keep dolphins and whales into that beach. It's a public space, and then anybody can see it. So when they drove in those animals, so they kept the animals there in the beach, and nobody is allowed to jump in the water. They say it's illegal. Anybody jumps in the water would be arrested. That's what the policemen were telling Sea Shepherd members. So knowing that, Stephen jumped in the water, so everybody thought the policeman is going to arrest him. So there's a tremendous tension there. But instead of doing that, he started talking about the manner. Japan is a country of manner. I was like, oh my God. Because, you know, living in New York for a long time, a policeman, they would just handcuff you right away, even if you're not doing anything wrong, right? That's how the police operates there. So right there also is something very different between US and Japan. And also, further, I talked to Sea Shepherd members afterwards, and they were very upset because they thought policemen lied to them because they didn't arrest Stephen. So from Japanese perspective, I think, you know, they could have arrested him, but they didn't because Stephen has a life in Osaka. You know, arrest is a big deal here. So once you're arrested, your life is going to be really jeopardized. So I think a policeman really give them a break and not arresting them. But the Sea Shepherd members are very upset that they're liars. Policemen should never lie. If they say they're going to arrest, they have to arrest them. So that's another, you know, difference I noticed from this scene. But anyways, this is like continuing from the first scene that you saw. It's all happened in 24 hours. And it was amazing. And just because I was the only person who speaks English, I got sort of caught in between. And I had to be a translator, you know, when they negotiated about this, you know, dolphin release and raising donations for that. So it was kind of frustrating. I did not want to step in, but I had no choice. And English speaking, I was talking about that today too. And I talk a lot to the journalists here. It's a huge problem for Japanese not being able to speak English at all. Why is that? It's such a problematic, you know. Asians, Southeast Asians, Chinese people, Korean people, they all speak, good enough English. It might be broken, but they are willing to communicate. But Japanese don't. It's not that they don't have education, but somehow they are not able to communicate in English. I think it's a huge problem. I think somebody should take it very, very seriously about this inability to communicate in English. And that's one of the major reasons why Japan is misunderstood by the international community, particularly in the sensitive issues like this. So I repeatedly talked to the Japanese, I think the journalists and everybody, and the government people from the government and whoever I can talk to. Anyway, so communication matter, that's one of the major subject that I wanted to convey in this movie. Especially not about this English problem, but this digital time, the way that we communicate right now through social media, internet. Somebody like Taiji fisherman who doesn't have an access to internet. They don't have a voice. We don't hear anything from these people, not just Taiji, but I think from all over the world. There are many people who don't have access to express themselves on the internet or digital media. We don't know what's happening to them, even in America. That's why, people were frustrated, and those who frustrated voted for Trump. Those who lived in, in the States, in the middle of the States, we did not hear their voice. Or the people in UK who voted for Brexit, they were frustrated by the globalism. Their life has been threatened, but we didn't hear their voice at all. So I thought what's happening in Taiji really reflects, it's not just about dolphin whaling issues, but it really reflects what's happening right now in the world. So that's how I wanted to craft this story, tell this story. So anyway, so Nakahira, what a surprise, right? So he was the only person who was trying to communicate with, under these circumstances, to the other side, meaning the Sea Shepherd members. And they were even forming the friendship, surprisingly. And he's the only person who talks about the importance of dialogue. And not just talk about that. Furthermore, he actually organized a dialogue event in Taiji. That was the first and last event ever in the same room where the both sides, representatives from Taiji and the activists, foreign activist group, sit together, almost face to face, exchange their opinions. So I want you to take a look at that scene. So from this dialogue event, I believe that all those differences were made very clear, right? Because in the West, people think the dolphins are like non-humans. But for Japanese, it's a fish. And I attended IWC, International Whaling Commission, twice for this movie. We ended up not using that footage. But right there, it's really microscope of what's happening in the international, even the conference. When you look at this little dialogue event, because all the representatives from the West who oppose to the whaling, they're representatives from the environmental agencies. But on the other hand, Japan is sending representatives from fisheries. So the goal should be very different. Because if you are from fisheries, their goal is to, catch as much as much as possible from the ocean, and provide the fresh, delicious food to the Japanese table, like a dining table, right? With a good price, a low price, and at the same time to protect the life of fishing industry. and the life of fishermen. But if you're from environmental agency, their goal is not to kill, and their main goal is to protect those animals. So how could we like come to understanding when we have such a big difference? There's a huge gap between us. And also what I realized through this event is the different idea towards the tradition. Like Japanese values tradition so much. If you live in Japan, I think you kind of realize that, right? How tradition is so important. And they don't question. If it has been continued for a long time, they want to continue for the future as much as possible, as long as possible. That's what the tradition means to Japanese. But in the West, as Scott phrased it, just because it's been done for a long time, it doesn't mean it's good. If that tradition doesn't fit today's society, if it doesn't fit 21st century values, it should be stopped. So whaling is one of them. That's what he says. That's why Catalonia stopped bullfight. That's why England, UK stopped fox hunt. So why Japanese don't understand that? It doesn't mean the tradition, just because it's a tradition, it's good. So those like a fundamental difference in the thinking is here, but we never talk about those fundamental differences. So that's why it's so extremely difficult to even compromise even a bit. And also, you saw Jay Alabaster. He is, actually, I met him in 2014. Closer to the end of production, I met him. But when we shot the footage of the dialogue event 2010, it was totally the coincidence he was there. So it was almost like a destiny. And I wanted him to be like one of the characters there, but I didn't think he was going to be such an important role in the movie, because he almost like guides through the film. And he is the opposite of me, because he is American and lives in Japan for a long time, and I'm Japanese and live in America for a long time. So we sort of see these issues from a distance. And we shared a lot of opinions and feelings. So he really expressed what I wanted to say in this story. And he became a sort of my voice in here. And he became a hope in this dark, situation. So later half of the movie, you'll see how Jay sort of integrated in this small community. So that's something I want you to see just a little bit. I think I was going to just show a little bit, but maybe I should show maybe 2 more clips lastly. And one is how Jay is trying to fit in Taiji. And also the second part is when Jay visits the 2 activists, Japanese activists in Tokyo. In Japan, we rarely hear the voice of the people who oppose the dolphin and whale hunting. But there are many people who don't like the idea. But somehow those voices rarely comes up on the surface of the media here. So I thought that was very important to introduce their voice here. So I want to show you 2 separate clips, but at the same time. So as you saw, this debate becomes, us versus them in Japan, unfortunately. But I wanted to show all different kinds of perspectives, including Nakahira's, that's a nationalist, and there's journalists, and fishermen, and activists, and it's just, this issue is just so complicated. And I learned so much in the course of 6 years of interviewing them and doing the research. But somehow this has been just told black and white. And wrong or right, who's right and who's wrong. And I think we live in such a diverse society, and if we can just accept and respect each other's opinions, if we all know that, you know, the opposite of the right is not wrong, the opposite of right is another right. And also, if we focus on more towards what we have in common rather than the differences, I think those misunderstandings should be more eased. Because even for fishermen in Taiji, or Sea Shepherd members, or animal activists, I think our common goal should be the same, to have and to protect the ocean, the richness of the ocean. So why do we pay attention to the small differences rather than looking at the bigger goals? So my message is, just like Bob Dylan sang, you're right from your side, and I'm right from mine. If you accept this notion, I think this conflict or misunderstanding, clash happening all over the world, intolerance towards the different cultures and values shouldn't be there, I believe. So this film is not to make a judgment whether it's right or wrong about dolphin hunting or whaling. Both sides is right and both sides is wrong. So this is my attempt to express that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megumi. We're going to have an open Q&A here in a moment. Before we get to that, I'll just ask a couple of questions here.
Okay.
As a documentary filmmaker yourself, I'm interested in what you thought about not the content per se, but the style of filmmaking that you saw in the Cove. As people have called it a propaganda film, only if they disagree with it. And yet it won an Academy Award in part because it was a very effective piece of filmmaking. Were you very much aware of that as you made your film, of how you couch these arguments vis-a-vis the Cove, since it's a response to the Cove?
I didn't want to say this is a response to the Cove. The Cove was definitely an inspiration to me. And there's nothing wrong about being propaganda. I think all documentary films are propaganda in one way or another. And whether it's a good propaganda or bad propaganda, I guess. So, but I think the Cove was more imposing the filmmaker's idea. The filmmakers came with the assumptions that they are the only right one. They are the right side. And the other one is the wrong side. So they are the heroes. They are the right guys, and they're the one who goes to sort of, reveal the bad guy's wrongdoing kind of attitude. I think that was very wrong. And in my film, I did not want to impose my idea, what's right or what's wrong. If I am to say, just like I mentioned, everybody's wrong and everybody's right. It depends on which perspective that you look at the issues. So in that sense, it's different, but I'm not like, this is not the response to the Cove. It's just, the Cove was just an inspiration, I should say. And I did not want to disgrace the Cove. It's the wonderful film, and it's really well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very interesting film. And I think your comments are very thoughtful and reflective on these issues. Obviously, it's implicit in the filmmaking, in the film, but what is your view on these issues, And I also wonder to what extent your experience of being a Japanese expat in New York City and moving back and forth between those two worlds has led you down this path to a kind of cultural relativism.
So my issues towards these issues, the dolphin hunting, Should I say that? I'm not sure if that's, right after I said I shouldn't impose the idea. I mean, it's very complicated. It depends on which aspect that you look at the issues. For example, like, when I saw those dolphins, kept in the small tank, that really broke my heart. Really, really broke my heart. And dolphins definitely really beautiful. I know they're extremely smart. But is it right to, take away the rights of these fishermen, hunting and surviving those industry, even though they're doing completely legally in this country? And also, I understand that this animal rights movement is becoming more and more active, which is not well understood, known here enough in Japan, and how Japan has been perceived by the world because of these dolphin hunting practices. So I think there should be much more open debate about this among Japanese. But on the other hand, also, I sympathize. I have a really deep sympathy for the small town, like Taiji. Just like also Jay mentioned about that, and what's really endangered is not dolphins or whales, but the small towns like Taiji, or the cultures and traditions that's continued uniqueness of the small towns. They're all sort of like on the verge of like distinction. So I agree with that. So it's very hard to say what's right and wrong. But I agree with both sides, and I disagree with both sides too.
Everyone, we're going to have an open Q&A. If you could please just queue up here. I ask that you keep your questions brief and direct so that we'll have more time for more people to speak. Also, you should know that we do broadcast this on our TUJ YouTube channel, which is at TUJ.com. And if you're on the mic, you're going to be on the film. So if you don't be shy about coming up and asking a question.
Hi. So thanks very much for a great film and a great talk. As we talked about, the Cove plays a big role in this. So I was wondering, have you run across anything in your interviews and stuff that tells you about what the discussion was like before the Cove came out? Because like in this last scene, we saw that, the reason Japanese people support whaling is some foreigners have told them they can't. So what was it like prior to the Cove? Do you have any sense of that? I mean, I know you started this after the Cove. Yes, in Japan. So I'm wondering how much is this driven by the Cove and how much was it actually there beforehand?
I think even before the Cove, people believe that whaling is a tradition, Japanese tradition, and eating whales is a Japanese culinary practice, which is not quite right. It's not like Japanese has been eating whales all the time at all, as you saw the Sakuma-san, the journalist, mentioned. But I think it was always the same feelings that, just because Japan has been criticized by overseas, they feel like they're imposed their idea. They have been pressured, so they're almost like, again, us versus them, kind of like, power balance, and then they don't, they are not willing to look at the core issues, if it's really necessary to continue whaling issues. But just because we are attacked, we need to continue, we need to protect this kind of mentality. It's attached to the nationalism. I don't think that has been changed. But just because of the Cove, I think that accelerated. But the Cove switched, I think, switched to the focus from the whales to the dolphins more. I feel that that's a different issues. Whaling issues is more, the big whaling is more about the the whaling itself, and connects to the ocean, environmental protection. But I think dolphin issues is more towards the about the animal rights issues, animal rights and animal welfare issues. So it's similar, but it's different. That's how I see it.
Hello. Thank you for the wonderful talk. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
And I had a question. The mayor of Taiji actually mentioned that its natural resources are very poor and they can't grow any vegetables or rice. So they're reliant on the whales in order to survive. And it seems like it's not a very rich town right now already. And its population is probably declining like everywhere else in Japan. So I was wondering what sea shepherds are suggesting for an alternate natural resource, if they are. And even without sea shepherd, I think the fish is being exploited right now anyway. So by 2050, it's going to be really low anyway. So it's not a sustainable whatever they're doing right now. So what are their plans?
You mean fishermen's plans?
The city of Taiji.
City of Taiji. Okay. Taiji is a population of 3,000 people. And it's really a tiny town. And Sea Shepherd is suggesting that they should focus more on tourism or whale watching and dolphin watching. But I really don't see it's practical because there is a town called Futo, very close to Tokyo, and there's a lot of divers go there. It used to be a big dolphin hunting town. So just because it's much closer to Tokyo and more tourists and more divers go there, so they really prohibited to kill dolphins and, to show the red blood, cover the ocean with blood and turn it to red, and they're very sensitive about that. But even the town of Futo, they're surviving. They're having a very hard time surviving. The fishermen, they're no longer hunting dolphins at all. And there's one former dolphin hunting fisherman. He is operating dolphin watch boat, but he is barely surviving that, and he cannot even himself make a living. He has to keep, continue fishing with the other fish. So it's easy to say it, but Taiji, it's so far, it's not really easy to go there. So how can you bring tourism there? It's not practical at all. And yes, I think about this fishing stock issues. It's not just about dolphin and whales, and I think it's overall fisheries. And it's not something that's done by Taiji, town of Taiji, but they are operating under the permission of Wakayama Prefecture. And that's why Nakahira is like saying that from the loudspeaker, that there's no use that you're protecting here, but you should go to meet the Wakayama Prefecture and the governor there, because they're the one who give a permission and quotas. I think the quotas by the Central Fisheries Government, fishery agencies. So the Taiji is just following the rules. They're not setting the rules, that they're just doing whatever they're allowed to do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're all welcome to speak, but please come to the mic.
Hello, Midori-san.
My question is about Scott and his daughter, because I saw the film, and at the very end of it, they actually left Sea Shepherd after they went back to U.S. And the moment when they were, his daughter said, "Is there anything my dad and I can do for you?" And he said, "Yeah, if you come and live, as a resident, and maybe we can work together. But you're just coming from outside." My question is, was there any mindset change while they were there, living every day and seeing these people, having dialogue with them? And what was the reason why they actually left Sea Shepherd after they went back to their hometown? Right. It could be your speculation, but you may know.
I know very well because we just had the Skype session the other day, and The reason why Scott and Laura left Sea Shepherd is because there's some kind of like this, I don't know, they just decided to go to the different directions. They felt that the Sea Shepherd is heading towards different directions that they expected. So it doesn't match their level of passion, because Scott and Laura were very devoted members. And Scott had a really good job at the U.S. government agencies, environmental agencies. And but he decided to quit and then work full time for Sea Shepherd, and even came all the way to Japan. But they felt that Sea Shepherd is no longer sort of like, aggressive enough any longer after a few years later. So that's just the different directions. I think that's why they chose to quit the organizations. And I asked them, if they regret or they learned something, and they have more understanding towards the Tai Chi. And it doesn't seem like that. They believe that what they said is completely right. And nothing has changed, I don't think, on their side. But I think Scott still talks highly about Nakahiro, though.
So I just found it really fascinating that there's this huge, fight around this, but yet Japanese consumption and demand is so low. So I don't know if that was something that you explored at all in your interviews or any of the people you spoke to.
This is the only part that I show. Those two women, activists and journalists, talked about it, and that's the only part that we introduced in the film. And I think I wrote a little bit more in my book. Yeah, the book with the same title just came out at the same time. So I talk further about that issues, but in the film, that's the only part that I talk about. Yeah,
But
I think everybody's aware of that. And then a lot of Japanese share the same thinking as those two women. A lot, especially those who live in Tokyo metropolitan area. And it's not about, this. I think outside of Japan, people might believe that Japanese are dying to continue to eat whale meat, but it's not the reality at all. But just because this whaling issue is attached to the nationalist agenda, that's why it's almost like, the tradition is attacked by the West and the foreign countries, we have to protect them kind of mentality. So I think that's what we all, a lot of Japanese feel the same way. But I have to say, not all Japanese. If you go to the western part of Japan, like Osaka or Kyushu, people eat more and more whale meat, much more so than people in Tokyo. So people in Osaka, if you talk to them, a lot of them still really like to eat, and they still eat a lot of whale meat too. But I don't think younger generation, young people do that. But we all grew up, my generations, we all grew up eating whale meat. The lunch, fried whale meat was served for school lunch. That was like a common menu. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for your interesting talk. And we haven't seen the whole movie, but I was wondering if at any part in the movie the fishermen were asked any questions about the percentage of dolphins that are actually kept and then sold to aquariums rather than being killed for meat as such. And whereas one of the fishermen said that the Cove was, that was made as a money-making thing. Well, them also selling live dolphins to aquariums, that's making money too. So did you ask them any questions about that at all?
I don't think I asked about the percentage, but definitely dolphin meat for the food consumption, the price is going really low. So their livelihood is really depending on the sales of live dolphins to the aquariums. That's for sure. That's what whalers mentioned about that, actually. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your talk. Japan is not the only whale hunting nation in the world, but compared to the critique that Norway or Iceland or the Faroe Islands get, I feel like they get a lot more backlash. What's your perspective on that?
I think because of the problem of communication, definitely. Japanese is so not good at communicating with the outside of the world, especially the sensitive issues like this, and expressing themselves in English. And just because Japan's been attacked and criticized so fiercely about these issues, they sort of like shut down. And even at the IWC, they have a press briefing every day at the end of the day, and they only invite Japanese press. And they are at the international conference outside of Japan. And they are the center of the focus and criticism. And why they only speak to Japanese media? I was like so upset to see that. There's definitely a problem from the Japanese government side, or not just the Japanese government, but the Japanese community. Intellectuals and anybody who are not able to communicate in English. Very simple, I think. It's one problem is the English communication skills, and also Japanese culture. They don't really, to talk too much or expressing your opinion is not really a good thing. I think the Japanese culture don't value that, so they'd rather keep it quiet, I think. Yeah, but I think in Norway, Iceland, also Faroe Islanders, they express themselves really clearly, and they also, not just they're opposing the idea, they also invite the members of the Sea Shepherd or the activists to listen to, what they have to say. So that is also lacking in Japan as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm really short, so. So in the film, it said that 70% approve of whaling, but it's still about 30% that are against it, but they don't get much attention in the media. And then Japanese people also are really against hearing out what Westerners and foreigners have to say. Do you think that if the Japanese activists got more attention in the media, do you think they would listen to them more than the foreigners?
Well, I think you might have seen a little bit in here that Japanese activists who speak up and go against the whaling or dolphin hunting, they're also really having a hard time. They are attacked, they're criticized within the country. So it's very difficult for them to raise their voice. And I rarely see people who comes to, the media, those like activists, like Japanese activists come forward and talk to media. I think from both sides, like Japanese media don't pay attention to them. And there is some reluctance from their side as well. Just like you heard, Kurosawa, she doesn't even use Twitter or Facebook as an activist. What a difference, right? So I think from both sides that they're just so reluctant to come to the surface.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
I'm curious kind of what you were talking about with communication. Maybe this is too short for me now. you're talking a lot about communication between the activists and the fishermen, and Japanese versus Westerners. Coming from kind of the media documentary perspective, how were you able to, after the Cove came out, how were you able to get the people of Taiji to trust you?
A lot of things, including drinking a lot of shochu. And I've been to Taiji I think I made more than 20 trips to Taiji.
Okay.
I never lived there.
Yeah.
I'm always just a visitor. But just keep communicating and talking and asking. Yeah.
Thank you.
And drinking a lot with them. That's a very important part of it.
Hey, I just wanted to
Hi.
thank you for your speech. It was really, really informative. I look forward to seeing the film. And my question was, in regards to, I guess, the whaling and the dolphin hunting industry. I had heard a bit, and I'd done some research online, and there were some people in different sources saying that the Japanese government, particularly like the kind of right-wing nationalists, were using the sensationalist sort of attention being gathered around the whaling industry, all the international spotlight, to sort of smokescreen against overfishing, and like the tuna population is becoming an issue, and like I think the trajectories are saying that like the tuna population is going to be like dwindling in the next few years. So did you hear anything in your investigations about anything like that?
Something related to tuna fishing?
Yeah, like a couple of sources were saying that the Japanese government was sort of using, I mean, because there was no like real maybe like sound economic basis for whaling, right? There's, you know, whale meat building up in stockpiles, you know, there's kind of well documented that it's not a big economic boon for Japan. But so people were arguing that the Japanese government is sort of trying to use it, the pro-whaling parts of the government are sort of trying to use that as a distraction from like other overfishing issues, to like hide that from the international spotlight.
Yeah. I don't think so. It's a separate issues. But I think the nationalists tend to sort of put these things together. I mean, connect with the nationalism and the whaling. And about tuna, yes, I heard somebody saying that, well, first that comes whaling. But when they shut down the whole whaling industry, they're going to go after tuna issues.
Right.
That, yeah, I've heard about that. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly, you know, what's happening. But I don't think they're using that to the whaling issues to keep an eye away from tuna issues, because it's not just tuna. I think a lot of fish have a problem.
Sure.
Like, yeah, stock problem. So.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And yeah, I think it's not just whales, but Japanese don't eat fish as much as before. The number of like consumption of the, you know, marine resources are declining for many reasons. So it's not just about whales and tunas, but also the other fish too. So people don't eat it. Like young people, I think, prefer to eat more chickens and beef today.
Hello. My question is not really about whaling or dolphins or much about that. The question I want to ask is the language problem, right? I'm thinking that is the government not giving enough incentives for like little children or adults to speak English? So if they had some kind of incentives to actually push forward the English language, that would change the mindset, that would change the media, and that would broaden their horizon, wouldn't it? So would you believe that, in a broader sense, it's the government? Or
Well, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. definitely the educational system can do much better job to improve English, ability for Japanese. And but also mentality. I think it has a lot to do with the Japanese mentality. Like one day, I was working for Japanese broadcasters, and I often had to send in a interview request or filming request to many organizations. So one day I was writing a letter, and I showed it to my British friend and asked him to correct my grammar. And he just quickly read through it, and he's like, "Oh, this is good." It's like, "No, this is not good. It's not perfect. I made a lot of mistakes." It's like, "Yeah, so what? You're not like, you're Japanese, so English is not your language. But this is, I understand what you want to say, and it's very clear. A few mistakes here and there, but it's okay because you're not American or British. So why it has to be so perfect?" And right there, I understood, like, why we all believe that it has to be perfect. Sometimes Japanese are too perfectionists, and they don't want to make mistakes. They'd rather be quiet than making grammatical mistakes. I think that kind of mentality has a lot to do with that too.
Okay, thank you.
And another thing is more fundamental. I think Japanese are very reluctant to form their own idea and express it in general, whether it's English or Japanese. They would rather keep it to themselves. And it comes out only time when they drink. Yeah. That's why there are too many bars here, right?
Thank you for sharing your movie and the clips of the movie.
Thank you.
I'm actually looking forward to seeing the whole thing. I've been involved with the Taiji issue and following the Taiji issue for many years. And that meeting that you showed and talked about, there seems to be a lot of negative feelings as a fallout from that. And I think what Jay said was that it was a missed opportunity. My question is, do you see any kind of situation where that kind of meeting or that kind of dialogue could start again? Because there really isn't any dialogue between the two sides right now.
Not at all. And I think later in the film I show that they're not even foreigners. Foreign activists go there anymore. Because Japanese government sort of like, well, they keep the notes. I think if you once go there as an activist, you have to show your passport to the policeman. They take notes, and the second time they try to enter the country, they block them. So, like for example, this year, September 1st is always the first day of the hunt, and there are only 2 foreigners there, I heard. And the last time when I shot there was 2015. They're really, were you there?
Yes.
2000,
yes.
yeah, maybe so you were in my film.
There were cameras, yeah.
Yeah, I was one of them. And so there are a very handful of people. Do you feel that? Like the government is like really closing down and try to push away?
Well, it seems to be only related to Sea Shepherd.
I see.
And my feeling is that that's more because of what's happened in Antarctica than what's happening in Taiji. So I think it seems to be just because of that. I don't think anyone from any other organizations has had any problems, with the exception of Rico Berry.
I see. Yeah, with Rico Berry was also,
Yeah.
was not allowed to enter the country
Yeah.
last year, yeah. Are you with the Rex group?
No.
No, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interesting story. So I have much difficulties in English communication, but let me try. So could you give me just an idea how many percentage of the people of the world are against the whaling or dolphins? Or if I can ask you, those who are attending here, who are familiar with somehow Japanese culture, how many of you are against whaling?
Do you want to raise your hands who are against whale and dolphin hunting?
Okay. 40 or 50? 40 probably.
Maybe half.
Half.
Yeah,
So how about in the world?
I think much more than that.
95, 100, nearly 100%.
They're probably
Mm.
definitely more than half. I
Mhm.
think in the West, I would say more than 90%.
I see.
I mean, it's just my wild guess. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I think people in Japan don't have that sense. You know, people get really upset about how
Mm.
Scott being aggressively like attacking, fishermen, but his feelings really represents a lot of people in the West, I think.
Mm.
So they should know that
Yeah.
instead of like turning their eyes and ears away from the fact
Yeah.
and the reality.
And you said it's just a different opinion, not good or bad. But is that the kind of unique way of thinking of Japanese, or do you think it can be shared among many people in the world?
It's just my idea. I don't
Okay.
know if the other people in the world agree with me, but that's just my idea. And whaling issues is such a male subject. Everybody's involved are men, and those who are interested or talk about these issues are mostly men.
Mm.
So I think as a woman female filmmaker, it could be a very unique perspective towards the issues, because men who are interested in this issue probably think differently. And a lot of men express to me that how dare you can say, Sea Shepherd is also another, the right side. They're totally wrong. They're terrorists. Like, they a lot of people don't agree with me at all. So it's just my idea.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
We have time for just, I will fill the gap here by the question, but we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Megumi, I wanted to ask you with reference to, the fact that the International Whaling Commission has set certain standards and rules, if not laws, on this. Japan is one of only several countries in the entire world that still practices this kind of whaling.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about the issue of international norms? I mean, you can talk about cultural difference on any number of issues, but are there certain norms with regard to food culture or the status of certain species or animals that transcend culture, a specific culture, and we could look at some sort of, if not universal standards, some international norms?
Who set the international norms based on what is my question. How can you set the international norms?
Well, in this case, it'd be the International Whaling Commission. So, secondary question would be whether or not you see them as being a legitimate organization that carries authority, right? United Nations, there are various organizations on civil rights. There are any number of different international organizations that impose certain values.
Like IWC started in, I think, in 1946 or so. That was just the whalers, I think that the first purpose of the organization was to continue the healthy whaling industry up till like, I think, 70s or something. And then when environmental groups and NGOs started having influence towards the organizations in each countries, the Western countries, so it's sort of like I think the organization sort of like transformed. It's considered more like the international IWC is more to protect whales, but originally it was not. So I think it was just, it changes, it seems to be, depending on the time. Their agenda seems to change a lot what was to hunt whales, definitely.
It's an interesting evolution.
Yeah.
I was happy that we were able to, we didn't show the Cove, but Rick O'Berry came here a couple of years ago, and to be able to map this issue, from different perspectives. So, as you mentioned, Rick was detained at immigration and was prevented from coming into Japan because he was regarded as being suspect as an eco-terrorist, even though he himself had been very explicit about not really being on the same page with the methods employed by Sea Shepherd. I thought that was a dish, I thought revenge was a dish best served cold, and they stopped him at immigration. So there's a larger issue here, I think, of civil society, civil rights, of being people, activists of any stripe, within certain bounds of civility, being able to express their views without it being prescribed and, basically criminalized. Right. So there's a number of really interesting issues here. We have time for anyone have any other questions? You had a question? Yeah.
Since I tried earlier on, thank you so much. It was a wonderful broad spectrum perspective. And I like the postmodernist take on it, a little bit away from the sort of Michael Moorish point of it. But to some extent, I have a small criticism. I don't know if you sort of fell into the trap of focusing on the Taji community, the coastal local thing. Okay, they call it whaling or fishing, you call it an issue of dolphins. Did you at any point feel the need to broaden the scope of your investigation and look at it more on the more from the point of view of the industrial whaling and the big interests there are there behind the fact that somehow the friction that possibly is an accidental byproduct of the activism of the Sea Shepherd crew, that friction is exploited by those who speculate on these strong sentiments, but at the same time they hide behind to fuel maybe a large-scale unsustainable research/industry thing. Didn't you feel that there is a need for a sequel to broaden up and leave the people of Taji aware in their corner and look at the broader picture? I don't know.
Yeah, actually, that was my original idea. I wanted to look at the broader perspective of whaling, about Japanese research whaling in Southern Ocean, and also look at this sort of microcosm of Taiji, this little town. So I was going to go back and forth between the macro picture and micro picture. But when I go more often to Taiji, I think that was much more interesting, and that's where the human story is. And I figured that it's a very separate issues from my point of view. And even though what's happening in Taiji, it's a little town, but you can see sort of like a broader picture of what's happening in the world beyond whaling issues, beyond dolphin hunting issues. So I did not want to just talk about the whale and dolphin hunting subject, but it's more about the global standard versus local sort of local values kind of perspective. So that's why I dropped that subject.
Megumi, you said the film is debuted now. It's in, where is it being shown? Where people
it's shown at the Eurospace in Shibuya. Do you know Eurospace? It's in near the Tokyo department stores in Shibuya. And if you go to okujirasama.com, OKUJIRASAMA.
Is there also on A Whale of a Tale, that website, is there information about the screening?
I'm sorry, there's not much information in the Whale of a Tale English site yet.
Can people find your email online, or?
Yeah, I
or
think
at least
so.
if they go to A Whale of a Tale, maybe there's a front door there for.
Or to my my Facebook, Megumi Sasaki.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you said, I think it's showing at Jack and Betty Theater in Yokohama.
Yokohama, starting September 23rd.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Megumi, thank you so much. It's really
Thank you so
thought-provoking, really
much.
interesting. Well,
Thank you.